Barry Morphew is back in Colorado. He is once again charged with murdering his wife. But this week, he flashed a big smile in the courtroom. His wife, Suzanne, vanished on Mother's Day in 2020. Her body was found in a shallow grave in 2023. Barry has not only maintained his innocence, but pleaded for her to be found when she was considered missing.
Suzanne, if anyone is out there that can hear this, that has you, please we'll do whatever it takes to bring you back.
What may have him feeling so confident, especially considering the evidence prosecutors say ties him directly to the death of his wife? We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Stewart. When Barry Morphew was arrested on June 20th for the murder of his wife, it was the second time he's been accused and charged in connection to her death. His defense responded by saying, "This is the same old, same old." They said to CBS Colorado back in June, yet again, the government allows their predetermined conclusion to lead their search for evidence. Barry maintains his innocence. The case has not changed, and the outcome will not either. We'll talk about Barry's interesting body language in court this week in just a moment, but the truth is, even though his defense is saying this case hasn't really changed, there is a lot more evidence this time around for prosecutors that they have now in 2025 that they didn't have when Morphew was originally charged in 2021. And to understand that and to lay all of that out, we need to go back to when this story first became national news. Barry and Suzanne Morphew seemed to have a perfect life. They had 2 daughters and they lived in Salida, Colorado. I mean, this place, it is a postcard. I've been there. It's gorgeous, incredible views, and it's an awesome spot if you're someone who loves the outdoors. In fact, when we go back to Mother's Day 2020, Suzanne had recently picked up mountain biking. It was on that day that law enforcement received a call from neighbors who had spoken with Suzanne's daughters, and they were worried because they hadn't heard from their mom. Police responded to the Morphew house, but no one was there. And there was also no signs of forced entry. There were no broken windows. The door was locked and Suzanne's car was in the garage. Later that day, police found Suzanne's bike. It was less than a mile from her home, and then her helmet was found 0.8 miles away from her bike. Deputies then called her husband, Barry. Barry worked in construction. He had left early that morning before the sun came up to go to the Denver area, which is more than 2 hours away, for a job. He told deputies that Suzanne was sleeping when he left around 5 o'clock in the morning. He also said he was working all day, so he hadn't planned on talking to his wife, but then he got the call from neighbors who said they were concerned that Suzanne was missing. Here's body camera video of deputies' first interactions with Morphew when he made it back to Salida. I want you to listen closely.
Where is it? Where's the bike?
Oh, it's right there.
Where was it?
It was like just right down here in this little embankment right here. So, sorry, GPS dude. We got the husband on scene here with me.
I'm here with my daughter. She's at Barry's house.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah, you can go down there.
Was it a crash?
I mean, the bike looked, the way it was laying, it kind of looked like it, but there's not really that much damage to the bike. That's the thing.
Lion?
Yeah, it was just like
Was
lying.
there no lion? Mountain
I didn't see anything that would
lion? I didn't see anything, and they're not letting us go over the side.
Because we're getting a track
Dogs, we're bringing dogs.
just right down in here, yeah.
You can hear that Barry is emotional. But remember, at this point, Suzanne is just missing. And he seems to be jumping to a lot of conclusions, even suggesting that maybe a mountain lion killed his wife. A few minutes later, he brings up mountain lions again.
Yeah, I know. We just want to double check everything, so yeah.
Did anybody look for foot tracks on the road?
I haven't seen anything really, but
Like people tracks? We're lying?
I didn't really notice, but I won't lie, I'm not like an expert tracker or something, you know.
The deputy goes to then speak with other members of law enforcement and then has to tell Barry not to touch the bike and contaminate the scene.
Hey, could you not touch the bike with your hands, please?
Hey guys!
That's the husband. Because I've been wearing gloves, I've been trying not to. So.
The investigator then asks the deputy how Barry seems.
I mean, it seems a little distraught. The daddy's kind of going back and like, why didn't they check the recruit? I'm like, we're trying to do the best we can. And this guy, I guess his name's George Davis. He showed up on his own. I guess Barry. Hey Barry, where are you guys headed? Okay. Here soon. I'm gonna probably have you come and talk with us more. All right, thanks, man.
Now, from what I heard there, the deputy says that he seems a little distraught over his wife missing. Deputies then go with Barry back to the house. And you can also sense that Barry has law enforcement's attention at that point, especially because of a piece of clothing in the laundry room that one would take with them if they were going to go mountain biking.
So, do you realize what you grabbed, right? Those shorts? Yeah. Those are for mountain biking. Yeah. Like the padded shorts you would wear when you go mountain biking. Yeah. So, that, I'm curious.
Yeah, I saw that they were bike shorts.
Yeah.
So let's talk about where Barry went on the day that Suzanne was missing. It was a work trip, he said. He said that he left early in the morning before daybreak, but then investigators talked to his coworker who said they weren't supposed to go up near the Denver area until Sunday night. And Barry just went on his own at 5 o'clock in the morning. The employee also said that he and Barry were supposed to drive together, but Barry decided to go by himself. Then the coworker said when he finally got up to Denver, Barry hadn't brought the tools that they needed for the job, and none of the work was done. After looking at surveillance cameras, deputies also say that Barry spent less than a half hour at that job site. Remember, he told them he was working all day. Surveillance video shows that Barry spent the day driving around a town 2.5 hours from his home, dropping items in trash cans at separate locations. Then in the hotel where Barry stayed, back in 2020, that coworker told the Daily Mail that when he went to the hotel room, it reeked of chlorine, which the hotel staff says they don't use to clean with. Now remember that chlorine part, because now in 2025, that could make this story more chilling than it already is and be a very important clue if this goes to trial. Barry told investigators that he and Suzanne had a great marriage, but that was a lie. Even a young kid who spoke to deputies when they first arrived on scene when Suzanne was reported missing seemed to know that.
Did Barry and Suzanne get along pretty well?
You can answer honestly. I think they've had some problems.
Okay.
Yeah, in the past.
Like, just normal.
Normal husband and wife type deal.
Oh, they like talk about separating or anything
They
like
have,
that?
yeah.
Okay.
I would, yeah.
And you know this through
Macy. Yeah, I'm very
Macy.
close with her.
Yeah, it's
daughter.
important that you
I know.
tell them anything that
Yeah.
you know like that.
Yeah, and he is in Denver for a work job. He's a landscaper, and he's got a big job in Denver. So that's where he is at right now.
Then the cell phone messages really showed the extent of this couple's problems. Investigators found on Barry's phone that he had allegedly deleted a text chain with his wife that included a screenshot that read a text from Suzanne that said, quote, "I'm done. I could care less what you're up to and have been for years. We just need to figure this out civilly." According to investigators, Suzanne was having an affair with someone who lived out of state. The marriage was crumbling, and investigators had a potential motive if they believed that Barry was the one responsible. Even though Barry, at this point, by the way, was going public, looking for tips, looking for information that could bring his missing wife home.
Oh, Suzanne, if anyone is out there that can hear this, that has you, please, we'll do whatever it takes to bring you back. We love you, we miss you, your girls need you. No questions asked. However much they want, I will do whatever it takes to get you back. Honey, I love you.
You can't talk about this case without talking about cell phone data, specifically location data and when his phone was on and when it wasn't. Investigators say that Barry appears to have turned off his phone on May 9th at 2:47 in the afternoon, and then he turned it back on at 10:17 p.m. May 9th was the day before Suzanne was reported missing. Suzanne's electronics showed her last activity to be around 2:11 on May 9th. Barry's phone then turns off around 4:37 in the morning the next day before it turns back on at 5:37 when he was headed toward Denver for his supposed work trip. Data from Barry's truck also allegedly showed some odd activity, like it being opened and closed at 3:25 in the morning and 3:49 in the morning. That was on May 10th when Barry said he was sleeping. Investigators noted that Barry's phone showed it pinging around his house at times it was on during the 2 p.m. hour on May 9th. Here's an image of what was presented as evidence back in 2021. Barry said he was chasing chipmunks around the house with a gun because they were a common nuisance, and at that point, Suzanne was sunbathing. Then you have this evidence that very much ties into what Barry is now facing in 2025, a needle cap that goes to a tranquilizer dart that the authorities found in the dryer, which they believe came from Barry's clothes, specifically in the pocket of some shorts. Investigators arrested Barry May 2020. They believed what really happened was that Barry shot Suzanne with a tranquilizer gun, then chased her around the house until she passed out, then killed her and disposed of her body. The daughter who lived at their house was also out of town the weekend all of this happened. Even though there was a lot of evidence pointing to Barry Morphew, and you can see why investigators saw him as suspect number one in the disappearance of his wife, back in 2020, 2021, this was a circumstantial case because Suzanne's body had not been found. And the charges didn't stick. And it wasn't for that lack of evidence. In April of 2022, right before Barry's murder trial was set to begin, prosecutors said they couldn't go forward with a trial and they asked for the charges against Barry to be dropped. And it turns out the district attorney at the time did not turn over evidence to the defense, and several of the state's witnesses were barred from testifying. That DA, her name was Linda Stanley, she ended up getting disbarred over all of this, and Barry walked free. But it wasn't because there was some piece of evidence proving his innocence. In many ways, it was this legal, procedural technicality, though an important one. The judge said that prosecutors could one day refile charges if they want. And that leads us to where we are right now. Barry arrested in Arizona in June, and now he's back in a Colorado courtroom. And let's go through some of the evidence that prosecutors now have that they didn't have back in 2021 when he was first arrested. On September 22nd, 2023, Suzanne Morphew's body was found. It was in a shallow grave a few hundred feet off a road. Investigators say the majority of her bones were recovered, but they were significantly bleached. Bleached could mean a couple of things. I recently talked with Joseph Scott Morgan. He's a former medical examiner. He often comes on the case with us. And he told me that bones could be bleached because of exposure to the sun, but also you think about that chlorine smell in the hotel room of Barry Morphew in Denver. Could Barry have tried to cover up his alleged crime using bleach? It's something to think about, and we're still waiting to learn more from prosecutors on that. Along with her bones, deputies found a cancer port, which is how patients receive medicine like an IV, as well as bike clothes that she was known to wear. Then there's a new twist in this story, in this new indictment that claims to show that the clothing lacked evidence of decomposition, which they believe means that she was not wearing those clothes at the time that her body decomposed. And there was a lack of evidence suggesting that where she was found was the original grave site where she decomposed. Quote, the forensic anthropologist opined that based on these factors, it was unlikely Suzanne decomposed from a fresh body to a skeleton at this location, the indictment reads. What may be a smoking gun in this case as well is the tranquilizer chemical cocktail that is called BAM, B-A-M. The autopsy found its presence in Suzanne's remains. It's often used on animals, and back in 2020, only one company in the United States produced BAM, and someone could only get it if they had a prescription from a veterinarian. And this is where things get even more interesting. The Morphews moved to Colorado from Indiana in 2018. And back then, Barry was a deer farmer. That's according to the new indictment. And he bought BAM in 2018 before moving to Colorado. Investigators looked to see who else in the surrounding counties purchased BAM. And quote, records further showed that no other private citizens or private businesses in any of the surrounding counties had purchased BAM prescriptions from 2017 to 2020. Other than the local park services, Barry was the only known person to have the substance found in his wife's remains. In fact, in bold letters, prosecutors write, ultimately, the prescription records show that when Suzanne Morphew disappeared, only one private citizen living in that entire area of the state had access to BAM, Barry Morphew. A grand jury indicted Barry for the alleged murder of his wife Suzanne this year, and he was arrested in Arizona and is now back in Colorado. And that's where we are now in this story. Here's video of Barry entering that Colorado courtroom this week, and you see he looks to the gallery and flashes that big smile. Barry saw one of his daughters in the courtroom, according to KMGH. The TV station also said the couple's other daughter was not there. It's unclear what Barry's daughters think about this new indictment against their dad, but to this point, they have been very supportive of him, at least since 2020. After charges were dropped in 2022, they went on Good Morning America with their dad, and they continued to say he was innocent.
I just love my girls, and I love my wife.
The hearing this week lasted roughly a half hour. It was very procedural from what we're told. His defense did bring up a possible conflict of interest between Barry Morphew and the public defender's office. We'll keep an eye on how that part of the story develops and if anything notable comes of it. But we do know when Barry Morphew is expected to next be in court. It will be on September 2nd. His defense requested 60 days to go over the case. Joining us now is Colorado-based criminal defense attorney Eric Faddis. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for joining us on this one. I know Barry Morphew's defense has released a statement saying this is kind of same old to when his charges were dropped in 2020 and the case that he faced then. How does the case in 2025 compare to the first time he was charged with his wife's murder?
Chris, there are a lot of similarities between the old case and the new case. There are some new developments as well. So in the new case, they did find Suzanne Morphew's body. They didn't find her body until years after the alleged incident. But according to forensic analysis, her body had this presence of a tranquilizer in it that the prosecution is saying really can only be connected to Barry Morphew. He's one of the only private citizens who had access to that tranquilizer. So I think the prosecution is really trying to tie this in more directly to Barry Morphew, and that development was surely a gift for the government.
It really was. Were you surprised he was charged back in 2021? Because there is a lot of circumstantial evidence. It's frankly just bizarre, kind of his whereabouts the day that she went missing. I can totally see why investigators pointed, but you didn't have a body back then when he was first charged. What did you make when you go back a couple of years to that moment that he was first arrested?
Chris, to me, it seemed like the government kind of jumped the gun in the first instance in filing this case. Certainly, there is some circumstantial evidence, some suspicious activity, that kind of thing. But we're talking about a murder charge, murdering your wife. And you got to make sure you have the goods when you're going to file that charge. And ultimately, the government didn't because they dismissed their initial case. And so, I think it was a bit of a hasty move on the government's part in the beginning. But now they believe they have their ducks in a row and they believe they have what they need to cross that finish line.
And for those who have just been getting back up to speed since Barry's arrest last month, when his charges were dropped in 2022, the prosecution requested the charges be dropped right before he was supposed to go on trial. The district attorney at the time ends up getting disbarred related to all of this. What happened that led to that?
Oh gosh, it was a huge mess, quite the debacle, really a significant controversy here in Colorado where I practice. It was in the papers and everything. So what happened was the elected DA, according to court rulings, had withheld important evidence from the defense, including evidence that could tend to show that Barry Morphew was not guilty. For example, there was evidence of other male DNA that is associated with Suzanne Morphew's vehicle. The defense didn't have that. And so the government, or excuse me, the court excluded a number of the government's experts, found that there was what's called a Brady violation for withholding exculpatory information. Ultimately, Linda Stanley, the elected DA, had made prejudicial public statements, which is also prosecutorial misconduct. And that constellation of factors led to Linda Stanley ultimately being disbarred, which is a tremendous sanction and a huge blow to the government initially. Now there is a new elected DA on the case, Ann Kelly, and she is moving forward.
And I think back to Barry's reaction when charges were dropped, and there were the pictures, and his daughters had been by his side. They haven't made any comments, to my understanding, on these new charges, a couple years later. But he goes on Good Morning America. He's proclaiming his innocence. To me, it felt like it was almost as if he was found not guilty, but the charges were dropped for a lot of the drama related to the prosecution. What did you make of how Barry Morphew has played this, even to now, where he was in court this week and he had a huge smile on his face when he walked in the courtroom?
A bit audacious, a bit bold in some of the actions that he took afterwards, including giving public interviews. That is always a risk when you are a defendant. And he knew that the case was being dismissed without prejudice, meaning that it could be brought again at a later time. So even with that knowledge, he goes out and makes these public statements and so, yeah, I was kind of surprised. It might make more sense for a person to sort of lay low and just hope this blows over, and so he can grieve and heal if he didn't do this. But that is not the route he took.
Suzanne Morphew, she loses her life. She passed away, but she was having an affair. That's something that prosecutors have talked about. That is part of this story. And there is this other person who was from out of state she was having her affair with. And Barry's defense, some of that evidence we're talking about that was excluded. That's where they've pointed. What is Barry's defense? Because there is, listen, a lot of people look at this and he's making these comments, but then it's he's going to Denver, leaving his coworker behind. You have all these different movements. The body cam video, he's talking about maybe it was a mountain lion when she was missing. And then you're like, that seemed like just an odd thing to say, at least for me when I went back and watched it recently. How does Barry Morphew's defense team handle this case?
Initially, they were sort of asserting that this may have been a missing persons case, that Suzanne may have just left the state to seek a new life, possibly with the person with whom she was having an affair. That defense is no longer viable because we found her dead body. So from here, the defense really has to strategize about what positions they're going to take. Of course, you can always take the position that the government simply doesn't have enough evidence to prove this murder charge. But I think the jury is going to be looking for some kind of plausible alternative explanation as to what happened to Suzanne. And so, is that some kind of wildlife encounter? We are talking about rural Colorado where wildlife is abundant. There are predators out there, but the autopsy and the evidence that's been uncovered, I'm not sure how strongly it would support a theory like that. So defense is really going to have to step their game up and re-strategize. I haven't heard of any sort of public statement regarding a new defense yet.
For you as a defense attorney, and I'm just thinking because as we're recording this is a day after the Brian Kohberger plea, and that's just kind of at top of mind right now. And his defense, very different case, but it was maybe we can get certain things excluded along the way. So then the jury might not hear about the knife sheath because the DNA, the way that they got it, it was the wrong way to do it. Maybe it was planted. So they're trying to pull away pieces of evidence that the state of Idaho says that they had that did not work for them, and now he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. Very different case, but involving Barry Morphew, where you have circumstantial evidence, but a lot of things that point to him. Is there anything that stands out to you that if you were a criminal defense attorney, you're going to look into and try to make sure a jury doesn't hear about?
Well, so his defense team has already taken a similar page from the Kohberger playbook in that they have sought to exclude a number of experts and were successful due to the prosecution's misconduct and failures in terms of discovery. So a lot of those experts are likely gone. The DNA expert, the cell phone data expert, and the vehicle data expert, the court has ruled those folks are going to be excluded. So unless the court changes its ruling, those folks are gone. Barry has asserted kind of an alibi evidence or defense here, that he was working and doing contractor work at the time of Suzanne's disappearance or shortly thereafter, and that he just had no involvement in this. One thing defense has to look at is who else has access to this tranquilizer that was allegedly found in Suzanne's body. My understanding is Barry Morphew is the only private citizen with access to it. However, there are veterinarians, professionals in animal sciences who might have access to that. So you've at least got to look at those folks and see if there is any connection between them and Suzanne Morphew.
Right, yeah. The National Park Service has access to it, and also Colorado Fish and Wildlife, according to the indictment, that they have it. So those are people, if you're the defense attorney, you're going to look through and see if there's anything that stands out. You followed this case. I lived in Denver at the time in 2020 when she went missing. It was a huge deal. And then the arrest, it was like, oh my gosh, here we go again. And then reading through the indictment, was there just a wow moment for you this time around with the evidence that prosecutors say that they have?
Certainly it was striking that they believed that Suzanne Morphew had this BAM tranquilizer in her body after they found it, after it had been missing for years. That's a huge piece of evidence because government says it's tied directly to Barry Morphew. No other private citizen has that. Beyond that, though, there haven't been a ton of huge developments between the first case and the second case. And there's some talk that perhaps the second case was brought because in the interim, Barry Morphew had filed a $15 million lawsuit against the government saying, hey, you guys wrongly accused me and ruined my life. And so there are some murmurs that, hey, did the government bring this case a second time because they're scared of that civil lawsuit, despite no, groundbreaking developments aside from the tranquilizer, which is substantial.
Yeah, it certainly is substantial. We'll see how it plays out. Eric Faddis, Colorado-based criminal defense attorney. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, Chris.
Again, Barry Morphew is expected to be back in court in Colorado in September. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.